Cool. Mute everybody. All right, cool. So thanks for coming. So I was having a lot of trouble deciding what to talk about. There's just a lot of information out there on breath work, and it can be overwhelming. And I wanted to take an approach that kind of didn't talk about I wanted to talk about some things that maybe are often overlooked or don't get talked about often when it comes to breath work. A lot of us think of breath work as like just doing inhales, exhales, some holds, and some tempo work, which is great. There's plenty of information out there, but I wanted to give everybody something, just a slightly different approach on how we can leverage mainly the mechanics of breathing to help regulate the nervous system. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Canva. Oh, two screens. Share. Nope. Sorry, I got two screens. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. All right, there we go. Jeff, can you see that presentation? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about stress and we're going to talk about breath. And I title it The Fundamentals of Recovery because many of us are so stressed out and we're stuck in what we call a sympathetic state that we don't ever actually recover from the stressors of life. Recovery is often, we think is the time in between training in the gym, but recovery is essential to, I guess, a regulated nervous system and a healthy body. And stress affects our ability to recover, and we can leverage breath to enhance our recovery. So our agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about me for those that you don't really know me. We're going to talk about the super system, the nervous system, stress, something called tone, posture, and the midline. And then we're actually going to get into breathing and then what to do after you've gotten all this information. So the big outcomes today are for you to understand the nervous system itself and the effects of sympathetic nerve activity. I want you to understand the relationship between stress and breath and how the mechanics and the way you breathe can actually make you more stressed. And then understand what tension, tone, and posture really are. So this is a fundamental just thing that I keep in the back of my head. I don't know if it's my rebellious nature when I was younger, but is to always question authority, to always push back, to not just take things at face value. Is you have to ask better questions in order to get better answers. And I don't like, I did this all through school, is that when I didn't understand something, I just kept asking questions. And it's like being like a kid, just keep asking why, until you get, to the root answer, or I guess an answer that's sufficient enough for you. And I really believe that like a lot of stuff in school, is just regurgitated. When I went to massage therapy school and went through a lot of my internships, like I was just regurgitating the information that I was given because these were people who, I guess, who have been in the field for a while, but I came to the point where like thinking like all of them isn't really thinking, right? And what was lacking in my career and just working with clients is like I lacked critical thinking. I was just doing what I was taught with not much thought behind it. And I hope after today, the stuff that I present is going to have you thinking a little bit differently about the way your body works and what breath work really is. So who am I? I don't like titles, but if we have to put titles on it, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a coach, therapist. I'm also a musician. I like to cook, whatever titles you want to give me. I'm just me though. My resume, I have a bachelor's of science in health and human performance. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist, licensed massage therapist, performance breath coach, and a certified recovery coach. My work experience, it looks like I can't hold a job, but to me, that's just me gaining experience over the last 15 years. I worked in high schools with professional sports teams, colleges, private gyms, chiropractor, PT offices, massage studios, just have a very extensive experience over the last 15 years of working and helping people. How I built my approach, I've had so many injuries between sports in high school. and then competing in powerlifting, grip, and strongman. After high school, those are all my physical injuries, but how I really built my approach was through mental health. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 7. This led to things like anxiety, depression, substance abuse, suicidal ideations that followed me until like my early 30s. And when I hit a really low point in my 30s, it was like I knew everything about the physical body. I knew how to train, I knew how to get stronger, faster, more powerful, and I was physically fit, but mentally I was a mess. And it's when I took a step back and started to look at the nervous system and then its intricate relationship with breath that I was able to then, I would say, increase my mental fitness. Understanding what anxiety really was, what depression really is, understanding what ADHD really is, instead of just being like, well, I have this, is really understanding what it was so I could take ownership of it. And that's so I'm really big in teaching and educating people and understanding the whys and the whats, because when you understand why we do things and what we do things, it's going to encourage you to do the actual things instead of me just saying, hey, do this, do these breath work, do these movements because I said so. It's applied knowledge that I think transforms your life. When you understand how your body works, when you understand how breath works, you're more inclined to work with it. Instead of I've gone to PTs before and they're just like, hey, do these movements. And it's like, well, why? Well, just because. Right? Like, I want to know the why and the what, and then I'm more inclined to do them. So that's kind of where this is going to head, is to help you understand the why and the what's behind everything. So the human body, the human organism itself is what is known as a super system. Okay. And the super system is defined by a set of subsystems constituting a whole within which each component interacts with or is related to at least one other component. So what does that mean? So the human body is divided into all these subsystems that work together that make us what is known as a super system. So the body has all of these: nervous system, muscular, respiratory, skeletal, cardiovascular, etc. They all work together to ensure your survival in the world around you. But there's only one that's really controlling the show, and that's the nervous system, right? So the nervous system essentially is the major controlling, regulatory, and communicating system in the body. It's responsible for maintaining homeostasis, and it keeps us in touch with our environment, okay, both internally and externally. So it's reading the environment, everything is reading everything right now, and it's making these precise decisions to ensure your survival. It's regulating your heart rate, your respiratory rate, your blood pressure, and it's constantly communicating with both internal and external environments. Now, homeostasis is essentially balance. That's our body. So like when you go to get blood work done, they have ranges, right? And anything outside of that range would be, you would be off, homeostasis would be essentially messed up. You're off balance. And your nervous system is constantly trying to maintain a sense of balance within the body. So the nervous system can be broken down into the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, central, everything in the middle, and the peripheral nervous system, which is everything outside of the brain and the spinal cord. I like to think of the nervous system operating on inputs and outputs. So everything in your environment right now is an input. So you watching this right now is an input, and then your brain and your nervous system are making outputs to ensure homeostasis is maintained. So, when I talk to clients, I like to say, so if you don't like the outputs that you're getting in your life, we need to look at the inputs. If you don't like your thoughts, if you don't like the way like your body looks, the way your body feels, if you don't like the way like you feel mentally, then we have to take a look at the inputs. What are the things that you're giving your body to respond in such a manner? So it's essentially how the nervous system works. I mean, you can get a doctorate in neurology, and it's a very complicated topic, but just understand inputs and outputs, and that would really, it'll help make the nervous system make more sense. The peripheral nervous system can be broken down into these two, the somatic and the autonomic. We're only going to talk about the autonomic. That doesn't mean the somatic's not important. It's just for this talk, the autonomic is the basis for this presentation. And within the autonomic, we have two subsystems. The first one is your sympathetic nervous system, and the other is parasympathetic. Okay. So autonomic to me is automatic. It's a control system that acts largely unconsciously and regulates bodily functions so you don't have to think about it. Can you imagine like the amount of energy and effort it would require from you to like regulate your own heart rate, your respiratory rate, digestion, like going to the bathroom? Like this system takes care of all of that for you. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. Parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. I like to think of it as like rest and recover is parasympathetic. So we're going to take this chart again. We have sympathetic on the left, parasympathetic on the right, and we'll return to this here in a moment. So let's take a look at stress first. So these are some pretty wild stats on stress. So like some medical research estimates as much as 90% of illness and disease is stress related. 75 to 90% of all doctors' office visits are for stress related ailments. OSHA has declared stress a hazard of the workplace, costing the American industry $300 billion. So like, you know, I think we just misunderstand stress, but stress is the culprit behind a lot of diseases and a lot of problems, which is essentially why, you know, as a coach, I've kind of pivoted towards like helping people manage stress, use stress as a tool, and like teaching them how to leverage stress so they can become the person that they want to become. So what is stress? Stress is a state of real or imagined threat to homeostasis. Anything that threatens our survival is stress. A stressor is an event or condition that makes us stress. Okay, these can be psychological or physical. Majority of stress today is psychological. It's self-induced. It's the way we talk to ourselves. It's the thoughts that we have, you know, anxiety and like all of that is almost self-inducing stress response in the body. Physical stress can be anything from training in the gym to, you know, car coming off to clip you as you step off the curb, or someone like threatening you in a back alley would be like a form of physical stress. There's good stress and bad stress. We're not really going to get into that. There's distress, which can affect you negatively. Eustress, which affects you positively. Like training and lifting weights is like a eustress. So we can look at stress through two lenses. The first one is subjectively. And this is what this means is that the same event or circumstance is going to feel different for each of us. So if we all go through the same stressful event, all of us are going to look at it and perceive it differently. And this is based on things like genetics, thoughts, beliefs, your personality, even your underlying state of health. And that's too much subjective from like a clinical standpoint. Working with people, there's too much to go through subjectively. Like I can't like go through genetics, thoughts, beliefs. Like there's just, if we're trying to make change, I feel we have to look at stress objectively. And stress is essentially your brain not feeling safe. So when we can say, hey, I feel stressed out, is essentially your brain doesn't feel safe. Now, this gives us more options regardless of the context of the situation or the stressor. Okay, so there's some things I want to point out on how stress affects the body because we're going to come back to it. The first one is the central nervous system. It affects the immune system. You know, it prepares more for injury than it does instead of recovery. So when you're in a stressful state, your body's going to be preparing more for you to get injured than it is to recover. The next is the respiratory system. So when you're stressed, your need for oxygen is greater. So what ends up happening is the muscles around the lungs tense and the breathing becomes faster and more shallow. And we're going to revisit that when we get into the mechanics. The other thing is the musculoskeletal system. Your muscles tense up, fight or flight. We got to get ready to throw down or we got to get ready to run away. So it has effects on every single system within the body. Now, if we are chronically stressed, these systems are going to be constantly in these states. I really don't believe stress needs to be managed. Everything online, here's how to manage your stress. Here's how to lower your stress. Like, we need to learn how to use stress as a tool instead of something to manage. I think when we look at stress as something that needs to be managed, it even makes us more stressed out. So instead of looking at stress as something we can use to get better, like we need stress as humans. It's how we've evolved and gotten this far. And when we look at stress as a good thing and something we need, we can then leverage stressful situations. I do it pretty much daily with my kids because my 2-year-old is out of control, and it can add a lot of stress. So looking at these stressful situations is, how can I adapt and evolve from this stressful situation to get better? Yes, there's extenuating circumstances where some situations just suck and are extremely stressful, and that's outside the scope of this discussion. So just a quick, like, hey, okay, so we're here in the middle, homeostasis, everything is balanced. We add a stressor, we go to sympathetic fight or flight. Stressor's removed, we go parasympathetic, we go rest and recover. Homeostasis has been maintained, and we now have balance again. Now, if we were to add a stressor, we go back into sympathetic, but if we don't remove stressors or we don't fully recover from that stress, then we stay in a sympathetic state, and we have what's known as overact, like sympathetic neural activation, where everything in the body is in a sympathetic state. And there's a reason I believe we're more predisposed to being in a sympathetic state is because there's more nerve fibers for the sympathetic nervous system in the body. The sympathetic nerves start at the first thoracic vertebrae, so this first blue one, and it goes all the way down to about L1, L2. So from T1 all the way to L1, L2 is all sympathetic nerve fibers, right? And keep that in mind when we get into the mechanics. So sympathetic, we have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. All right. So fight, you're getting ready to face it head on. Flight, you're running away. Freeze, you're not doing anything. And fawn is actually your response. You're almost like you're trying to avoid the conflict. And from a clinical standpoint, this isn't set in stone, but when I'm working with someone new, these are things that I note in the back of my head to almost see what state they could potentially be in, which will help how we go about care, how I talk to them, and just how we treat everything. So if someone has a tight jaw or teeth grinding or intense anger or need to attack, like that's a sign of being in a fight state. So these aren't like, you're not going to find these in a diagnostic book, I don't think, but these are just some things that I use when I'm working with people to just kind of, okay, they might be in a freeze mode. So we have to like this is how we're going to treat their symptoms. Parasympathetic nerve fibers. So there's less of these. Okay, there's only 7 of these compared to sympathetic, which there's a lot of. Okay, your parasympathetic nerve fibers are only located within the brain and the sacral portion of the spinal cord, so this green part. So you really only have them in these 2 spots, and there's less of them. So I believe we're more predisposed to being in a fight or flight or sympathetic dominant state due to the amount of sympathetic nerve fibers coming out of the spine, right? Parasympathetic, we have rest, digest. We've added these other ones, invest and impress. When you're in rest and digest, you get more energy to do things and invest that energy into learning and doing new things, right? If you're constantly in fight or flight, your energy is depleted. But when you're in parasympathetic, you now have more energy to do more things. And then with all these new things you've learned, you're going to want to impress. So if you are constantly in a sympathetic state, you cannot build out the reflexive tissues and processes that would correlate with healthy stress adaptations. If you're constantly in a sympathetic state, that means you're never getting into a parasympathetic state, which means you're not resting and digesting, and you're not recovering from the stressors of life. So we're seeing the words regulated, dysregulated being used. A regulated nervous system is the ability to move flexibly between different states of arousal in response to stress. It means your body can go from fight or flight to rest and digest with no issues. Dysregulated nervous system is the opposite. So when there's an imbalance between the 2 sides of the autonomic nervous system. Most of the people that I work with, the degree of sympathetic nerve activation they depend on does not allow them for natural reflexes of their body to offload the stress accumulation. Their body is almost trained in a sympathetic state. It's all that they know. And they don't even realize it. Like people come in, yeah, I'm not stressed, but you end up talking to them and you do the assessment, you're like, you're pretty stressed out. And I like to think of it as just training. They've trained their nervous system to be sympathetic dominant, and we can override our own patterns by conditioning or training the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's where breath work comes in. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them in like the comments or the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. So if you're thinking of them as you're going, just drop them in the chat and I'll answer them when we get done. All right. Your stress systems need support in order to settle. And that's where breath work comes in here. All right. And a lot of the things I get back, oh, it's just breathing. Like, what's the big deal? Like, I just breathe. Why do I need to work on my breathing? Like, I breathe fine. Like, I'm just breathing. Like, how? Yes, it is just breathing, but it's the more I've learned, I've been studying breath work for most of my career, but really have deep dived it the last 5 or 6 years, and it keeps the rabbit hole keeps getting deeper and deeper. Now, I just want to say breath work is only part of what I do. It's not an end all be all, but it's low hanging fruit. And when people breathe well, they have good breath mechanics, they have good breathing physiology, and they have a good handle on their stress, it makes the strength and conditioning portion, the rehab portions go that much better. So to me, it is like the foundation. You have to think we come into this world on an inhale, we leave on an exhale, and that's a lot of reps in between. And without breathing, so when I was a paramedic, the first thing we assessed, do they have an accessible airway? And then are they breathing? If they don't have an accessible airway and they're not breathing, then we can't move on to anything else in working with the patient. So breathing, I think, is the foundation for everything. Without it, we die, right? Oxygen is the most valuable resource that we have. It's not money, it's not gold, it's not time, it's oxygen. Without oxygen, you die. So I believe, and this is through my experience working, that breath work can improve your posture, can reduce pain, it can bring mental clarity, restores balance to the nervous system. It will improve mental and physical performance. And the question that really had me deep dive into like breath work is why did we evolve to consciously control our breathing? And I believe it's an evolutionary advantage for us to override this. So if you think of like a deep diver, they don't want to be trying to breathe while they're underwater. They need to control their breath so they don't stress out in that situation. Or if you're like being chased by something and you want to like slow your breathing down to almost like playing dead, right? Like breath work or controlling your breathing gives you control over your brain. It gives you control over your state, and it puts you in control of your brain and your nervous system. Otherwise, I'm not sure why we evolved to consciously control our breathing. I've tried looking for it. I can't find the answer. Again, breathing is the foundation of everything. Without it, without quality breathing, performance will fall short. So proper breathing does all of these things and more. I think just through breathing, we can get all of these to improve, and like just from improving like brain function, blood circulation, even movement mechanics. Like that's why I think breathing is well worth like investing in, because it improves all of that. I don't like the words functional or dysfunctional, but I just don't like the word dysfunctional for some reason. Maybe it's from my time with ADHD when they said I have a dysfunctional brain, and I don't like the word. But for what we're talking about today, functional breathing is breathing that is efficient and appropriate for the current state of the metabolic demand. So right now, as you're sitting there watching this, your body has metabolic demands, meaning we need oxygen for energy. And since you're not doing anything, you shouldn't be breathing too hard or too heavy. It should be a nice and easy type of breathing. Mouth should be closed, tongue's on the roof of the mouth. And then dysfunctional breathing is breathing as inefficient or inappropriate for the current state of metabolic demands. So forms of breathing dysfunction, we have overbreathing, which is you're breathing too much per minute. So you're almost blowing off, you're taking in too much oxygen and blowing off too much CO2. Vertical breathing is where we see the chest, just the rib cage just rise. Paradoxical breathing is where like the abdomen moves and then the chest, or vice versa. Like there's just like this seesaw pattern going on. sleep apnea, and then breath pattern, which I got some videos here for you guys to see some forms of dysfunctional breathing patterns. So I think breathing mechanics is, everyone's like, how should I be breathing? What should I be doing? Is it, do I breathe with my abdomen? Do I breathe with my chest? Belly breath, chest breath. Breathing is a full body movement. It starts in the head. We're going to talk about like all the diaphragms involved, and essentially it's pressure management. And learning how to manage this pressure will change how you move and how you feel. Breathing is not a chest thing, it's not a belly thing, it is a skull to pelvic floor type thing. And we have 4 basic pressure cavities in the body. We have the cranial, we have thoracic, we have abdominal, and we have pelvic. Okay. And all of these pressure cavities are going to affect how we move. How we manage pressure in these cavities are going to affect the parts of the nervous system that are activated. So we're going to go back to Boyle's law. Okay. Boyle's law describes the relationship between volume and pressure of a confined gas. So when it comes to breathing, the confined gas is essentially oxygen. So the pressure of gas is inversely proportional to this volume. So volume increases, pressure decreases. If volume decreases, pressure increases. Okay. So what's this have to do with breathing? So there's a nice little picture here. So the volume of the container on the left has increased, the pressure is going to decrease. The gas has more room to move. But as we decrease the volume, the pressure is going to start to increase. So what's that have to do with breathing? So when we inhale, the volume in our lungs and chest cavity is increased, so we can get more air in. So this decreases the pressure. It's a pressure differential. There's atmospheric pressure, and then the pressure in our chest and our lungs. And there needs to be a pressure differential for that air to come in. So when we breathe, the chest cavity will expand. And then as the diaphragm flattens, when we inhale, this will push our internal organs downward, causing the volume to decrease and the pressure to increase within our abdomen. So if you were to take a slow, deep breath right now, the diaphragm is going to flatten down and the internal organs are going to go down. You're actually going to feel the pressure in your abdomen increase, but the pressure in the chest will decrease. And when we inhale, things expand. So air comes in, we should see movement 360 degrees when we breathe. We should see it to the front, the back, and the sides. What happens here in the pelvic floor is that as the internal organs come down, the pelvis will actually come under to what I call like accept the goods, to accept the internal organs coming down so they have a place to go as the diaphragm pushes them down. Inhale, things expand, the whole body. So this is a really important thing, which we're going to talk about with like tension and tone, is in order for inhalation to occur, the thoracic cavity must expand, and the expansion of the thorax or the rib cage directly influences the capacity of the lungs. So if you can't expand the rib cage, the lungs can't expand, which means you're going to have decreased movement options of the upper body. And it also means that if the lungs can't expand, we're not going to get enough oxygen in to create the energy needed. So think if you're training and your rib cage doesn't have room to move, that means the lungs don't have room to move, which means now you're going to take shorter, more shallow breaths. Because if the tissues of the thoracic wall are not compliant, it's going to be difficult to expand the rib cage. Right. So if you go back to like the effects of the stress response, one of the things of the respiratory system was more tension in the muscles of the rib cage, constricting the rib cage's ability to move. So if we're always stressed, the rib cage doesn't have as much room to expand because it's constricted, and now our breathing becomes more shallow. So when we exhale, the volume of our lungs and chest cavity is reduced, which in turn increases the pressure within our chest cavity. So if you were to take a full exhale right now, you would feel your rib cage compress and you would feel the pressure increase in the chest cavity. But as the diaphragm comes up, the pressure decreases in the abdomen, which you can feel when you breathe. So exhale, everything compresses. We should see it get smaller. So the 3 primary diaphragms that I work with breathing mechanics is the tongue. So the tongue should sit up on the roof of the palate or the palate of the mouth. The thoracic diaphragm and the pelvic floor. Today, we're just going to talk about the thoracic diaphragm. The tongue and the pelvic floor actually both have their own presentations, but the one most of us are familiar with is our thoracic diaphragm. Your tongue should be suctioned to the roof of your mouth. So if you wanted to try something, take a breath with your tongue in the bottom of your mouth and just note how that feels. And then take a deep breath with your tongue suction to your palate, almost like that suction before you make like a clicking sound. And you should feel a little bit more of a pull from the diaphragm when you suction your tongue to the roof of your mouth. And we actually learn how to use our tongue in the suctioning to integrate the tongue into the diaphragm through breastfeeding. It's actually how we start to learn how to nasal breathe, and coordinate the action of the tongue with the diaphragm. When a baby's born, its breathing is erratic, but it's through breastfeeding that they actually learn to coordinate their inhales and exhales and their nasal breathing. So breathing starts in the head. So we need to incorporate suction and tongue mechanics if you're looking to optimize your breathing mechanics. The movement of the diaphragm is tightly coordinated and neurologically linked with the muscles of the tongue and the throat, along with the pelvic floor. And breathing has been shown to be a major influence on the circulation of venous blood and cerebral spinal fluid in the brain, which is really important, right? We need good CSF flow going through the brain. We need good venous return so we can get like the junk out of our brain. And here's a study here. I'm not going to really go into it, but it just shows the effects of what's known as the respiratory force when we breathe and how it moves cerebral spinal fluid and the venous flow of the brain. There's the research article right there. It's called A Brief Overview of the Cerebral Spinal Fluid System and its Implication for Brain and Spinal Cord Diseases. But breathing and the heart are a big player in getting that fluid to move around. So if our mechanics off, it's going to really influence how well or how, I guess not well, the cerebral spinal fluid moves. So the movement of air into and out of the lungs is completely dependent on healthy respiratory muscles. Okay, so we're just going to look at the diaphragm because that's the one most of us know. And it's our primary breathing muscle. Without it, we can't breathe, right? We've all had our breath like knocked out of us. Like it's like your diaphragm spasming. It's like so hard to breathe without a functioning diaphragm. It's actually controlled by both sides of the brain, which is genius, which we have what's known as the phrenic nerve, meaning if one of those sides gets chopped, we still have part of our diaphragm that can still breathe for us. I don't know. I think it's just a beautiful muscle. I think it's one of the most important muscles we have, and it's often underappreciated part of human anatomy. You know, most people don't even know what it looks like. They don't know how it moves. And I think just looking at it, I don't know. I think it's a pretty cool muscle, and it's a really important muscle that we should train. So I just want everybody to visualize what this muscle looks like. So muscle fibers are just straight. So if we look at the diaphragm, all of these straight, I know these are curved, but essentially they're straight. These are your muscle fibers. And I want us, when we get into the posture section, I want you to visualize what these fibers look like. And we'll talk about muscle fibers here in a second. But the diaphragm connects down here into like L3, L4. It connects in with the psoas or the hip flexors with the QL muscles, and it has fascial connections from the head to the toe. So if your diaphragm's not moving right, or it's in a position where it's not moving right, it's going to affect everything that it's connected to, which is pretty much the entire body. So if the diaphragm's out of position, so like a lot of hip flexor issues are because the diaphragm on the backside is not moving too well. A lot of shoulder issues are because the rib cage is in a poor position, right? Shoulder blades attached here. If people aren't breathing into the back here, it's going to affect that relationship. So these are just, you can see the rib cage, the lungs in there, and how everything's just kind of compacted in there. So think, if the rib cage is compressed or those muscles are tight, like the lungs not only have nowhere to go, but then it compresses the heart, which now the heart has to actually beat more because it's not going to have as much room to move. So constriction in the rib cage now gives the heart less room to move, which then can have effects on the cardiovascular system. So when it comes to movement, this is just what I feel and believe is that joints act, which then influences muscle tension. So joints is where movement occurs. So when we look at the posture stuff, you're going to look at the position of the spine, and I want you to think of how the muscles are attached to that. So when I move my elbow, so movement, I don't say like, hey, flex your bicep. I say, hey, move your elbow, and the muscles respond to it. Muscles only can do two things. They can get long or they can get short. So if I move my elbow, the bicep shortens. Okay. And then when I go back to this position, it lengthens. So think of that's for every muscle in the body. I turn my head this way. These muscles lengthen, these muscles shorten. So we can look at the position of the joint. We're already going to know what muscles are short and what muscles are tight. So we're more concerned with how well the joint moves, and knowing that if we restore the function of the joint, the muscles will follow. Right? Position dictates the function of the muscle. All mechanics and movement patterns center around how well you have access to your diaphragm. If your spine is not organized in order to utilize the diaphragm correctly, the diaphragm will actually have to work harder because it's essentially out of position. And then you'll end up compensating through your neck and extremities to make up for that. And we're going to look at the zones of breathing now. So just go back to like thinking like how that diaphragm looks. Like, and we look at these, we look at how the muscles attached to these areas, how that would either make them longer or make them shorter, how it would change the length of the diaphragm, and how that could affect how we move. Right. So here's another. This is called, we call it open scissor position. Right. So you can see then when someone breathes, we'll see these in the videos, is that all this air, this diaphragm is just going to go this way coming down, and the pelvic floor will match. Instead of it coming straight down in the pelvic floor, going like this, it then pushes all the air forward. So these are just similar positions. So misalignment changes the way the muscles function. So when I look at breathing, there's essentially 3 zones of breathing that the body utilizes, and different muscles operate in each zone, and we do need each zone. Okay, how your body chooses or what zone it chooses is going to depend on its perception of what it needs, right? Is there a threat to my survival, or is there no threat? That's going to determine how you breathe. So zone 1 is what we're going to call abdominal and low thoracic. Main muscle involved here is the diaphragm. Passively, all these other ones are involved. So how it looks and feels, your skull, your rib cage, your abdomen, your low back, waist, pelvic floor should all expand and swell. And then the reverse would happen when we exhale. The nervous system impact is zone 1 breathing is the most sedating and calming of all the breathing zones. It triggers a parasympathetic response within the body, right? Diaphragmatic breathing. That's why for centuries, people have been practicing this type of breathing because it's what helps you relax. Zone 2, this is usually the most common, as you'll see in the videos. I'm pretty sure everyone that comes in to work with me is a zone 2 breather. It's very rare that I see a zone 1. This is mainly, so the diaphragm is involved, but a lot of it's more chest. This is what we would call a chest breather, which we want to breathe into the chest because that's where the lungs are. But we see a lot of muscle usage here. Some of these muscles on the back. You'll see people with like their pecs will be tight, their rib cage will be compressed, and it looks like Popeye. You'll see expansion of the ribs, and the rib cage puffs out into this expanded shape. All right, so it is ruled by both sympathetic and parasympathetic, but it's much more sympathetic. This is our zone of fight. This is usually how people are breathing when they're training, when they're doing physically active things. But if you are stuck in these zones, if you're stuck in a zone 2, you will tend to have like a higher resting heart rate, higher blood pressure, digestive issues. A lot of digestive issues are actually nervous system issues, right? We literally have this part of the nervous system called rest and digest. And like this gut health thing is this huge thing in the health and fitness world, but they're not even looking at the nervous system. I don't want to say all digestive, but a large part of digestive issues come because people are stuck in a sympathetic state and they aren't in a parasympathetic state. People have gut health issues and you're not addressing the nervous system, you're not going to fully heal their gut. Zone 2 breathers typically breathe through their mouth, which we don't want to do. Zone 3, I've seen some of these type of people breathe. It's pretty wild to see. It's mainly just the neck. traps. So when people are like, I have all this tension in my neck and in my shoulders, it's probably because that's what they're using to breathe. It's a stressful way to breathe, and that's their main way of breathing. And you literally see like this is like a vertical chest breathing. They're literally hoisting their shoulders up with their neck muscles. And this is a panic breath. This is total sympathetic dominance, all because of the way that they're breathing. So they may say, I don't feel stressed, but when you look at the pattern and how they're breathing, you'll see like their sympathetic nervous system is driving the way that they breathe. And these types of clients typically have tension, headaches, insomnia, really poor digestion, anxiety, and muscle pains. So zone 2, if you're always zone 2 or zone 3 breathing, you're going to have shallow breathing. And it's usually because of 2 lifestyle factors, and they're not the only factors, but the biggest one, this is an adaptation to what the body encounters from a movement perspective on a daily basis. So if I'm sitting all day like this, and this is how I'm breathing, it's going to affect, expansion and compression of the rib cage. So if I'm here, you can see how the back part's bigger, more expanded, and the front part's more compressed. And then I have to stand up. These structural adaptations come over time. So like if people, it's not sitting's not the part that's wrong that is bad. It's sitting in the same position all day. It's sitting in like that knees at 90, hips at 90, forward at our computer. That's the position most people sit in. If you were to sit on the floor, you're going to find yourself moving into all these different positions. It's more time spent in the same sitting position that's actually bad. And then the second is stress. So if we're constantly stressed, it's going to make our breathing more shallow. It's going to restrict the rib cage from moving. And then you're going to end up having poor breathing mechanics. And then we end up in this continuous cycle where stress causes the shallow breathing, and then the shallow breathing causes the stress. And then essentially we make it a habit. We're turning stress into a habit. And our body lives in this constant state of fight or flight. Yeah. And this leads to serious health issues, like the figures from before, like almost 90% of health issues can lead back to stress, right? So decreased immune system, increased recovery times, anxiety, depression, fatigue, weight gain, respiratory problems, all because of the way that we're breathing. Okay, I know it was a lot. Don't worry, you guys will get a copy of this so you can watch it and go over it again. So now when I work with people, what I'm actually assessing and looking at are these things here: stability, tone, posture, and midline. So stability, I feel, has been bastardized by the fitness industry, by a lot of people who don't really understand what it means. We're like, hey, we're going to do stability, where people tend to think it is like planks or isolation holds, which have their place. But I encourage all of you to try to hold a plank position and walk. It's not possible. Like, our body isn't meant to be tight or hard. Movement should be fluid. It should be dynamic. And stability really is your muscle's ability to stabilize a joint as it moves, right? Or the ability to manipulate forces so you can resist your body being moved in ways that are potentially harmful. So we want to stabilize the joints through their range of motion and ensuring that they don't get hurt. If the brain trusts you, you're going to have almost, you're stable through a full range of motion. If it doesn't trust you or it doesn't feel safe in those positions, it's going to start exerting more control over it. Stability is strength, and strength is dynamic. We have 2 types of movement. We have dynamic movement and static movement. Well, static, sorry, we have, static, I guess, static movement. And strength is dynamic. It's not isolated rigidity. Stable is strong. Stable is strong through a full range of motion, right? So when I assess people, we're looking at muscle tone. And muscle tone is just the continuous and passive partial contraction of muscles. So this picture, this guy's got tone in his bicep. Like, you can see the muscles, the tone in the muscles. He's got tone in his chest. He's got tension in his biceps, in his abs. Like, muscles should be soft. They should be pliable. Like, your abs shouldn't, even if you have a 6-pack, like, they shouldn't be hard and rigid. They should look soft and pliable. So when the easiest way to see how hard the nervous system is trying to exert stability over an area is looking at the tension and tone in there. If there's a lot of tension and tone and muscle in a certain area, then we know that the nervous system is really trying to stabilize that area. An increased tone means that there's lack of blood flow to the nerves and the tissue. So if I hold this position all day and there's this tone in the bicep, there's lack of blood flow here. So then the tissue's not getting adequate nutrients, adequate oxygen. The nerves are being compressed, so they can't communicate as well. Right? So your body has active tone and tension where the skin and, and the muscles feel hard to the touch. The area is underfed with blood and it won't manage a resting state very well. Less blood flow means that the tissue becomes less ready to receive force. And then when the tissue is less ready to receive force, it potentially gets injured, right? And I'll tie this into breathing here now. So I want to go back. I said, hey, sympathetic, it's through like T1 through L3, all right? We're more inclined to being sympathetic dominant. The tone in the trunk is going to determine your access to a parasympathetic state. Here's where I'm going to tie everything together. Okay. The effect of sympathetic overactivation or muscle tone will cause instability and compression in the cranial and sacral regions, making it harder to access the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have tension and tone in the muscles along the spine or the rib cage or the abdomen. It's essentially squeezing the shit out of those nerves there. It's going to cause an instability and compression up in the parasympathetic nerve fibers, making it harder to access. So we're going to talk about midline. So I learned about midline through MoveMed, a lot of like looking at breathing through this mechanical process through these guys, Nate, Ben, and Dave. I've been working with them for a couple, I think 2 years now. Their MoveMed is a tool that I have at my disposal and that I use along with a lot of other things, but they introduced me to the concept of midline, which refers to our most important neurological tissues, which is essentially our spinal cord and our internal organs, our heart, our lungs, our digestion. Like if we don't have good digestion, we don't have good like respiratory, we don't have a healthy spinal cord, like we're sick, right? We need those structures to be healthy. And these structures develop first in the process of creating the embryo. And this is the tissue your brain cares most deeply about. So again, without functioning respiration, digestion, and excretion, you die. So when the midline is stable and properly aligned, it supports optimal nerve function and overall bodily function. Right? But if there's any disruptions or instability along the midline, it can lead to issues such as muscular tension, neurological tone, pain, or dysfunction. So our nervous system is constantly assessing our environment, and it tells our midline tissues whether it's time for more sympathetic or parasympathetic actions, right? Do we need to be in fight or flight, or do we need to be in rest and digest? And remember, without safety in our brains, our midline structures will structure around our sympathetic nervous system, right? If we don't feel safe, midline structures are going to be more sympathetic dominant. So how I assess midline, I look for a spine that has natural curves and a nose stacked over tailbone. All right. So posture, I don't like to posture shame people, but what posture tells me is how their body is controlling or managing their center of gravity. All right. So by looking at their posture, I can see where their joints sit. I can see the lengths of the muscles that are attached to those joints, but posture is just a representation of your body in a snapshot of time. And we want to be able to be balanced. We want those natural, as soon as you lose the curves of your spine, you're going to lose the amount of options for movement you have, right? So we're going to go through these and we're going to just show you. So all these videos, I just have people say, hey, just take a couple of deep breaths for me. I want to see how they're breathing. So the first thing I notice is one, they're breathing through their mouth, which is, we want to be breathing through our nose. You can see how all this movement is happening in the neck and the chest is coming up. So if we think about where air is going, pressure, volume, not getting much movement in the backside here. We're almost using this as a pivot point to breathe. The diaphragm should be coming down, but we're using the neck and the shoulders here. And I think that's almost what almost all these people are doing. So you can see the neck usage, the mouth. I think she closes her mouth on the second one. But you can see, okay, I just take a deep breath. That's how they take a deep breath. And this person had complaints of pain in the neck and low back. So you can see they're almost using that low back as a pivot point to breathe. And then they're shrugging their shoulders up And yeah, there was a lot of tension in the neck. This one's a little softer, but you can see how all this air is moving here, not much movement down here. You can look at the ripples in the shirt. You can see how that's moving more forward. Same thing here. Breathing with their mouth, which is a stressful breathing pattern. So the rib cage is just coming up. There's not actually much change structure, but you can see all this movement in the back here. So they have low back pain. They also we're complaining of like jaw, TMJ pain. I mean, they're using their neck and their chest to hoist their rib cage up. They're not even using their diaphragm. So when I palpated and I did some soft tissue work around the diaphragm, it was tight and rigid. This is an advanced CrossFit athlete. And you can see again how this is all moving forward. So now extrapolate that times 23,000 breaths per day. It's a lot of reps. So you can see as the collarbones are sitting more forward, there's going to have tightness in the pecs here. There's more length in the muscles back here. Using the chest, this is what I would say a zone 2 breath, as this is coming more up in here. And you can see how they're losing, right? The low back, they shouldn't have this much curve this high up. You can see how they're using this, all this movement's going forward. So they're going to have tightness around the erectors in the back. So their midline is essentially off because they don't have those naturally occurring curves. This is a yoga instructor I work with. This is what a good breath should look like. Right? There's not much movement. And I'm looking at the shirt, you're looking at everything here. Like you should be able to control your deep breath. When someone says take a deep breath, it shouldn't be, it should be a nice, controlled, long, deep breath like this one here. She was like the first one I've seen in like a year that had like, I was like, whoa. Okay. Last thing before I close, breathing in the nervous system. So the inhale is directly tied into the sympathetic nervous system, bringing in oxygen. I call this the gas. The exhale is directly tied into parasympathetic nervous system, getting rid of CO2. I call it the brakes. And I like the analogy of it's not the gas that makes the car fast, it's the driver who knows how to and when to apply the gas and the brakes. It's strategic. It's knowing when do I need to apply gas, when do I need to apply the brakes, and you being the driver, using your breath to control those things. If you're all gas, I hate there's a lot of people I know are like all gas, baby. If you're all gas, you're gonna crash. You got to know when to apply the brakes, and breathing gives you that. So closing. A resilient, adaptable, and flexible nervous system needs to experience some stress, challenge, adversity, and even failure. Stress is important. When you are pushed outside of your comfort zone, your nervous system can learn to function more effectively under stress, provided it gets to fully recover from the stress activation. Okay. There's no quick fix. You know, I tell clients is there's no quick fix. You didn't turn out into this position overnight. It's going to take time to get you out of it, and it's going to require you to put that time in. You need to be consistent. So if someone is constantly in a state of fight or flight or sympathetic nerve activation, they didn't get there overnight, so it's going to take time. We have to train the parasympathetic nervous system. And the hardest part about recovery is building aspects of your foundation that previously couldn't handle your stress or stressors. Right. So I think what happens a lot in the rehab space is that like when you get hurt, it takes you further from where you want to be. So if I get hurt and it's going to take me further to where I want to be. So I have to do all this work to get back to where I was, but then I have to do more work to get past that because where I was is what got me hurt in the first place. And that's why I feel people don't truly recover from rehab is because they don't put the time in that they need to recover. It takes time and it takes being consistent and training your body to build a foundation so you can handle those stressors, right? Because the position that you were in that got you hurt in the first place, we don't want to get there. We got to go past that. And it doesn't happen passively or by chance. Like the driving force is you. Like you have to want to do this. Like you're going to have to willingly go through a bunch of uncomfortable shit to get there. And I don't feel I heal anybody. Like you have to heal yourself. and your actions have to become in line with your intentions. And through breath work, like it gives you complete control over everything. So thank you for coming. Now what? So I'm introducing this to everybody that attended before I release it to the public. I have a breath and stress course. It's a quick 4-week course. So the goal of the course is to educate and empower you on how your body works so you can learn to work better with it through breath, movement, and stress tolerance training. So everything we talked about today, from the pressure management, utilizing the tongue, the pelvic floor, compression, expansion. I'm going to teach you all of those things. I'm going to teach you more in depth how the nervous system works. You're going to learn how to develop resiliency to stress, be more present in your life, learn how to work through difficult situations, be calm under pressure, essentially condition your nervous system for healthy stress responses, and you will gain the ability to regulate your state, your perception, and behavior. So what does the course include? It's going to have 4 Zoom sessions, so class sessions where I will do a talk on a topic, but I'm also going to give everyone 4 one-on-one sessions. So each week you'll have the class portion, and then we'll do a one-on-one session with me. So that's where I will actually take you through all the movements. I will teach you how to do them. And then it's your time to ask questions if you're dealing with any issues. And I show you how to start implementing these things in real life. So this is kind of the plan for right now. Week 1 will be the breathing triad and developing the midline. Week 2 will go more in depth with mechanics, learning how to integrate the tongue and the pelvic floor through the diaphragm. Week 3, we'll talk about physiology and CO2 tolerance. We didn't talk much about that today. It needs its own kind of week. And then week 4 is putting it all together. It's going to start July 2nd. It's going to be priced at $650. But for everybody that attended today, it's just going to be $150, and there's only going to be 10 spots available. So that's my offer to you. You will get an email with a link if you want to sign up for that, on how to sign up for that. You're also going to get my recovery book and breathing book. You'll get those in emails over the next couple of days, but you'll have till Sunday to get $500 off of this course. And I just want to say, everybody that came today and people who are going to watch this here in the next, in the future, like, thank you. When I was at one of my lowest points in my 30s, and didn't really want to be here anymore, this thought came into my head, was there's people I've never met who you're going to help. And so like, thank you for everybody that's watched this, because if I've helped any of you who've watched this, like, you're the reason I would say, still here. Like, you give me the fuel to keep going and get better and sharing all this. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to help you. And also keep that in mind for you, that there's people you've never met who you're going to help. So when you're feeling down and out, like, just know that if you won't do it for you, do it for them. But by doing it for you, you are doing it for them. So, yeah, if there's any questions, appreciate you too, Colin, and your time. Jeff is out. Taylor, thank you for attending. I will send out these emails over the next couple of days. If you guys need anything, you have my email, you can shoot me a DM. But if there's no questions, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Looking forward to hopefully doing one of these a month. So if there's anything that you want or need, just shoot me a message. I'm always here for you. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.